Hello, Cookie Pocket hosts.
Hello.
How are we doing? How are we doing this holiday season?
Doing all
Not
right.
bad.
I'm currently decorating my house, actually. The room that I'm in is very, very bland right now, but upstairs there's so many lights. Trust me.
Well, stop your decorating just for a minute, Zach,
Yes.
because you're about to get transported to 1914
Oh no.
and see a bunch of bombs and artillery pieces and terrible things. But in the light of everything, in the light of God, the clouds are parting, and you will have pictures of your enemies' wives and play soccer with them and drink alcohol.
This is going to be an illuminating experience for me.
Yes. So before we get into this, Mitchell has finally brought a guest. You thought it wouldn't happen. You thought it would never occur. But I brought my most trusted man in my life on this podcast today. So please introduce yourself, mystery guest.
I am BRENT BARDSLEY, Mitchell's father.
That's exactly right.
Well done.
How are you doing, Dad? How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm very honored to be. I appreciate all you guys having me on. I really do.
Yep, he's been an avid listener from the very beginning. One of our top listeners for sure, and he's made it to the big leagues, and he's now part of the family.
A super fan.
Super fan. Yep.
I think this is the first family member of a host that we've had on the show, so that's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, my dad's going to be breaking down the doors to be the next one. So.
And we're ready. We're ready.
We are.
Christian's dad, get on here. All right. So we did Joyeux Noel, which basically, in literal translation, believe it or not, is Merry Christmas in French. Because this is a French-made film, 2005, and it premiered at the Cannes, however you pronounce it, Festival of 2005. And it's a war drama film thing. It's like a war drama, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. I changed my mind. Yeah, war drama. About the fabled and partially true, maybe not true, we'll talk about it, Christmas truce that occurred in some facet in World War I, 1914. And what did you guys think of the film? You know what? I'll start with my dad. My dad gets to open up.
All right. Well, I enjoy war movies. First, I'll start off with that. I had rated this film 4 cookies for the cookie pocket, four in the pocket, and I enjoy movies like this. This story's been told before. The Christmas truce is kind of it's an historic event that has been reported in one way or another along several points on the front lines in the early part of World War I. I think the original story had to do with the Kaiser, the leader of Germany at the time, sending a professional singer, to entertain the troops on Christmas Eve. And it ended up being a calling off of all hostilities. And this movie was interesting in that beyond that, it showed how this effort that these soldiers had to add a little bit of Christmas cheer to to pause the battle ended up going awry. This didn't work out. The maintenance and the relationship that the soldiers had for this one moment ended up poisoning their efforts to think ill of one another in the future. So I like the way the story was told. I like the actors that they selected for it. I thought the characters that they had picked out, the actors that they had picked out were appropriate. They were memorable, although don't quiz me on all their names.
Same.
But I really like the backdrop of World War I to tell this kind of story. World War I was kind of like a moment in history that warfare had changed. It went from medieval almost to modern. It went from, there's actually, Germans used to use clubs in the trenches that actually had spikes on them.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to using primitive weapons like that, they had the machine gun and they had the tank, and it came out with poison gas and all these horrible things that came from that war. So that being the backdrop for this effort that these individual soldiers had, I thought, to add some joy from the holiday season for this, I thought was really moving. So I enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it a 4. It's not a Hallmark now, but I had really thought that this story was told really well,
Mm.
and I enjoyed the acting, even the fighting. I think it was kind of a good, gave you a sense of what they were giving up to have this, to achieve this.
Yeah, I am glad that there was a bit of there wasn't a ton, but there was some combat at the beginning of the film, which I think does help to kind of establish a sense of where we are. I know we a couple of years ago, I feel like we watched Silent Night, I think, which was the Hallmark Christmas movie set during World War II. And that didn't have a ton of, I mean, we saw the wounded soldier and whatnot, but there wasn't a ton of that conflict, I feel like, to set the, or to give us a feeling of the setting. Whereas this opens with them in the trenches and brawls and stabbing and using each other kind of as sandbags. I thought that this film was okay. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I do think I enjoyed it. I am intrigued to hear more of the history that it sounds like you have ready to pull out, Mitchell, because I thought that I knew this story fairly well. I once wrote and directed a church pageant based on this story as well for Christmas.
Cool.
So it's a story that like I've trod before, and for me, I didn't feel like the movie brought that much new out of the story. It more sort of told the story that I'd heard before in a more cinematic fashion, which is I think is all right, but didn't grip me that much. I did appreciate that it was told kind of from all 3 sides of the conflict, though. I liked that. I feel like that's kind of unusual in war films, is that you see something from all sides of the conflict and that everybody speaks the appropriate language as well. That I thought was kind of a standout. And I noticed a couple of seasons ago also we watched the movie Ivan's Childhood on the show, and I did think that there was a little bit of visual language in this that was kind of nodding to that movie, which I thought was neat. Specifically in Ivan's Childhood, there's one scene where they're all going off into the trenches and you see the silhouette of like an iron cross against the sky. And during the early scenes in the trenches, there's like the exact same kind of cross in the background. So I enjoyed it overall. I gave it a 3. I think it's an inspiring story, whether or not it's entirely true. But it didn't blow my socks off necessarily. And I was surprised that it was nominated for best. I forget if it was Best International Picture of the Year, whatever what was called that year.
International language, I think.
Best International Language Feature or something like that.
Yeah.
I was surprised it got that nomination because it doesn't feel that extraordinary to me, but I did like it.
Yeah, I think I'm following along similar lines as Zach. And I agree that it didn't blow my socks off either, but I think when evaluating this, you just inevitably have to give it points for the source material. And this is something I sort of regularly battle with when I'm rating anything, be it an adaptation of like a stage musical or a book, or based on a true events or a real story. And I think basically at the end of the day, you have to weigh the impact of the story, because as a viewer, that's the whole of the experience is what actually happens. So that's where a lot of my credit for this comes. I felt like maybe the like cinematography or camera work was not stand out to me. It was certainly like competent, but I think like Zach was saying, it didn't scream like awards to me. But I do like all of the performances a lot. I enjoy similarly the representation of all 3 sides and all 3 languages. And I think maybe the trade-off of having like 5 or 6 main characters at once is that, of course, you don't remember their names, and
Yeah.
it gets a little bit difficult to follow all of them. Towards the end of the film, when the priest is getting chastised by a superior for holding a mass, I was kind of like, is this the first time I'm seeing this priest? I kind of had trouble recalling everything as I went through this, but I really like the ties to the music. Obviously, shocker, especially when the tenor, I forget his name, but when he first starts singing and he sings Silent Night and O Come All Ye Faithful, which are two songs that I get to sing in the Cleveland Orchestra Chorus at our holiday concerts every year. We open with O Come All Ye Faithful, and Silent Night is one of the encores. So that was kind of neat. I know, and pivoting back to my whole source material point, I guess I can't really give Joyeux Noel credit for Silent Night or O Come All Ye Faithful, but I do think it's a heartwarming story. It was something that I felt like most or all of my family could watch and at least appreciate, which is always a nice thing. And yeah, I on the whole I enjoyed it, and it certainly crossed that 3 out of 5 threshold, which to me marks a good movie. So
Yeah.
Well, you can see where I get my history from.
Absolutely, yes.
The inspiration. So I really enjoyed this too. We watched it together here. We were in the same room, and both of our socks are on. Metaphorically, they were like halfway off, probably.
Okay.
But I'll say that it was a really, yeah, it was really good. Heartwarming is definitely an adjective. There we go. Adjective. Yeah, adjective that comes to mind. Describing word.
Yes.
And I think it was. We had watched it before, and I didn't really recall too much of it, and I wouldn't want to say it's forgettable necessarily, but it's kind of like a calming, very digestible like war film. It's like almost a war adjacent film, and part of that might feel like because of that, because of the scale. The scale seems pretty small. Like it's not really an immersive kind of war film, which World War One is like a very immersive conflict in general. I mean, like most literature and entertainment pretty much is all like centered around like you're immersed, like you are getting trauma right now from explosions and people getting slaughtered and beaten by clubs, like my dad said. But I think there was a different way of telling the same story, and I think there's a lot of mixed messaging and reporting on how true the story is. I feel like there's definitely a lot of connecting fibers that were mustered out of nothing to kind of keep the story more engaging, which is pretty common. But I definitely feel like it was the based on a true story is definitely a lukewarm um, term, just because all of it is pretty much based off of soldier accounts, and they do go into like a little bit into that. There's a little bit of an implication that everything was kind of taken by soldiers' letters, and that there was one little remark about a Enrique Maria remark about the accounting of the actual battle. So the actual war records don't really have any. Actually, no, literally don't have anything. With any sort of truce or anything like that. And I'm sure if there was any attempt at it, obviously treason, that whole thing. But I do think what I really liked about this film in particular was that kind of it's telling the narrative in a less retrospective lens, which is definitely really easy. Christian's dog.
She was jumping on the desk, and I was worried the sound would get damaged.
It's really easy to retroactively look at wars in the 20th century and kind of apply this gray area kind of lens on it, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes that lends to further detail we didn't already know, and sometimes it kind of it loses. I don't want to say it just loses accuracy. It does lose accuracy, but it also kind of loses the I guess like the convention of the time, or like the cultural aspect, I guess is what I'm getting at. I mentioned that in my review. I think the cultural immersion here is very unprecedented, honestly, compared to other World War One films. Not only, like you said, Zach, the three different countries, but them also speaking their own languages and having
Mm-hmm.
their own interpretations of like social interaction and having different ways they offer friendliness
Mm-hmm.
and even different ways they speak to each other, like more bluntly or more eloquently. And that also changes between the individuals. And I just feel like those interactions really make the film stand out a lot. I know my dad mentioned it was, I didn't even notice this, but the way they were counting, what was it? The Germans count with their thumbs, or
Germans, yeah, they don't use they use their thumb in the counting on their hand.
yeah.
So when they represent a number with their hand, they start with their thumb. And throughout the rest of the West and the United States and everything, we would do it like a peace sign with two fingers, and where we would count to two and hold up your index finger and your middle finger. But when the Germans count to two, they would hold their index finger and their thumb.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that
I didn't
was
recognize them doing that in the movie.
yeah,
That is good attention to detail. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, I think attention to details definitely really surprising. Obviously, yeah, heavy exaggeration of the story. There's question about the soccer thing ever even happening. There were some
Mm.
accounts of it, but we're not 100% sure it ever happened. As is like my dad mentioned when we were watching it, a lot of like crazy accounts of war things happening that are really
Mm-hmm.
weird, out of the ordinary, are usually from like soldiers' letters. And
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a why. Like you could talk about all day, like speculate how true those really are or not. But it's not a well documented thing that happened necessarily. But there's definitely a lot of anecdotal evidence to support that some sort of Christmas truce happened, and
Mm-hmm.
for sure there were ceasefires on holidays all the time, which you couldn't
Yeah.
really say nowadays, where we kind of plan. I say we, the United States, but a lot of countries plan around holidays happening, and that's when they have offensive, very
Mm.
Mhm.
traditionally.
Mm.
But yeah, long story short, it's a very exaggerated story. A lot of very exaggerated moments. Honestly, having that one the Dutch singer being involved was very weird. It was a little interesting kind of side story thing that, I mean, it just didn't really lend to the theme very well, in my
Mm.
opinion. But yeah, I didn't really plan this ahead in terms of the questions, but
I have a question,
I
go
had
if you
one
ahead.
don't
too.
mind.
So.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I feel like oftentimes when we're discussing a war film on the podcast, Saving Private Ryan becomes sort of a benchmark, even though we've never discussed it at
Yeah.
length. Because Mitchell, if correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you took issue with its sort of simultaneous hyper realism and brutality, and also like strong sense of aspirational like patriotism,
Mm,
and those tones kind of clashing. And I mean, this is a different film. Like you've mentioned, it's sort of a war adjacent movie at times. But I wonder how much a similar, how much that calculus entered your mind when you're watching this. If you felt like there was a conflict between realism and optimism, and if that's different for a holiday film or for a movie such as this, which is much more about portraying this humanistic moment than portraying the war at length.
well, my dad feels the same way about Saving Private Ryan.
Oh,
That
okay.
was going to be
So
my next
what do you
question.
think about that comparison, about the like the
Uh,
patriotism plus the realism type stuff?
yeah. I mean, I don't think I've contemplated the real contrast. But I will say that most, you when you approach this movie, you're looking at this like this could be an anti-war film, right?
Mm.
So, I mean, any
Yeah.
movie about World War One that I've ever seen is can be considered an anti-war film because World War One was you were talking about scope and scale of the battle. I mean, if you see interviews with World War II soldiers that have served in both wars, and the World War II soldier would always say, "Oh, that's nothing. I served in the big one, or I served in
Mm.
the Great
Mm.
War." They consider the World War One, even in World War II, they consider World War One like the end all be all, total apocalypse. So any
Hmm.
movie that takes place with a backdrop of World War One, you'd think would be it would be an anti-war film. But in this circumstance, I'm getting a more sense of a kind of like a celebration of the holiday
Hmm.
from this, more than I would get as any kind of preaching. Pardon the pun, because there's a lot of preaching in this. But preaching any type of stance on war and battle and things like that. And I think to answer Christian a little bit, the authenticity of it. I mean, if you get down to stitches, I mean, as far as the uniforms, I mean, it's eye candy to somebody like me. I was like, looking for the accuracy of the uniforms and all these little nuances and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It was really interesting. But I think there was less emphasis on overall on authenticity than there was the messaging, and I think the messaging had more to do with the holiday than it did with any kind of world anti-war stance.
Yeah,
Sure.
I totally agree with that. Now I'll answer the question too. But I totally agree with that. I think, especially considering, I feel like this was, like I was saying, it was more respect to the culture of the time. I do think there's a context to be understood about how people thought about war then versus in World War II was pretty drastically different. There was a lot less there's a lot less nuance and even though we've seen Paths of Glory, had to bring up Paths of Glory. Obviously, there is a lot of, like I was saying, like retroactive perspective of the overall like political science and the philosophy of the entire war. And there's a lot of ways to portray that in media that's very intriguing. And I feel like that's kind of where Paths of Glory gets more on the pushing, like how is this war kind of turned out in everybody's heads kind of perspective, whereas this is like it's linear, like choppy, and I'm not sure to what intent that was, like how far that actually was meant to be intentional, but I do think that's very much lends to that period where people are not really thinking about a whole lot in terms of like geopolitics, or people are a lot less understood about other cultures by a significant margin. And even
Mhm.
then, obviously, World War II, like to now, is not even comparable either. But just the advent of like signal and using telephones and more heavily relying on telegrams and everything, um, made a pretty huge difference on kind of cultural integration. We're talking about empires that are very much culturally stratified, and really don't think about a whole lot of these things as much. And it's a lot harder to spin that kind of perspective. So that's kind of the main difference, like from a cultural side of things. Why like Saving Private Ryan for me definitely feels a lot more preachy. It feels a lot more um, like kind of like trying to tell like a raw patriotism kind of perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
and not like a full on like definitely an anti-war film. But at the same time, like my dad mentioned, I don't really feel like this is an anti-war film. Like
Mm.
he said, like World War One is inherently anti-war in a lot of its portrayals, but I do think this is more about the coming together and the holiday and the morality and the positivity behind it than it is about like uh, why Spielberg hates Germany so much and why he very much is interjects a lot of American
Mhm.
idealism in this case. And there really isn't to me a lot of idealism uh, in this film.
Hmm.
Now, I that's not necessarily a criticism that I hold against Saving Private Ryan myself, but I will say that I do think there's frequently in American portrayals of conflicts in which America was involved, there is a
Yeah,
kind of patriotism in those films that I feel like you often don't see as much in European movies about World War One or World War Two. I've mentioned on the
right.
podcast before that I grew up in England, and every book that I ever read about World War One or World War Two, or every lesson that I was ever taught about it, the tone was less, oh, these boys were heroes who went out to fight the good fight, and more, oh, these boys were sent to the front lines to tragically die, and it was this great sadness, which I think you can kind of equate those two, and I don't necessarily think it's one or the other, but I do think there's sometimes a more heroic spin that American movies put on war than I've seen in more European films. So I think that's maybe a tone that doesn't even enter this one as much, because the perspective is coming from a more French or British or German thing of, the boys went out there to die rather than they went out there to fight the good fight.
Mhm. Yeah, you guys covered it. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on this. On the Saving Private Ryan point, I am more so. I'm at least less bothered by what that film does. But yeah, I pretty much agree with you guys and don't have much more to add. But thanks for covering it.
I was curious because Mitchell, you had mentioned that this is mostly based on like letters or potentially subjective accounts. So there's room for exaggeration. Are there any like out and out falsehoods in this where we know, okay, that did not happen, or at least it didn't happen in the way it's portrayed here?
So, well, based on what I know, we were talking about it
No.
after the movie too. We were like, is this like real, or like, who is that, the Kaiser, or the who is that? And we found it was like the Crown Prince. We're like, oh, okay, it's the son of the Kaiser, which was kind of hard to pick up on a little bit. Well, you could go ahead, Dad.
Yeah.
What comes to your mind first?
I think what was reported is that the Kaiser had sent a singer that was the male singer, to entertain the troops for Christmas Eve. There wasn't supposed to be a truce or anything like that. The Kaiser's intent was to entertain the troops on the German side. So he sent the male singer there. The introduction to the female singer, I think her name was Anna, Dutch. I think she referred to herself as being Dutch. Fluent German though. I don't think she's part of the lore as far as what was going on. I think that's one, and also I think we don't know about the cat, Nestor or Felix. The cat couldn't differentiate between the enemies, right? The cat was friendly with Germans and the French, and they each named it and claimed the cat as their own. So, but yeah, I think that the female, and also the I think it might have been the method in where they got caught, going through the soldiers' letters and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I don't know for sure that was a false, but it just seemed kind of, made up.
Yeah. That's kind of the understanding that I had about it. I don't think there's anything that was outright false. I think the first immediate comparison to me is like Patton, especially like the opening scene is like an amalgamation of quotes that are from completely different periods for different things, right? Our George C. Scott reference returns for this holiday, but and that kind of plays out for the rest of the film. There's a lot of like, compounding these scenarios and things that we're pretty sure happened, or like they're slightly exaggerated, but the general point gets across. This is kind of the same thing, where it's like we know all these things happened at one point or another. We don't know to what extent they happened. We just know that somebody accounted for it somewhere, and I think that's pretty much the limit. Now, there's things like, obviously, I'm not sure if anybody ever wrote it down or anything, but this probably didn't happen. Like the singer taking the tree and walking out in the field.
Right.
I don't think that happened. and those are a little bit like, that's a little iffy. One thing that made us very uncomfortable was the Scottish guy kissing his dead friend, or kissing his dying friend, and then laying on his dead frozen body. I mean, probably maybe happened. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in the war. We don't know. There's probably some crazy scenario that was written down somewhere.
Yeah, it was bizarre.
Yeah, but that was included. So I feel like this is less about accounting a true story, like an event that's from beginning to end, like this happened, and kind of the core messaging and pulling from different sources and kind of bringing it all together, and kind of using that as like the tagline, using that as like the propagating force or whatever. I don't know what you're propagating them, cyber terms and stuff, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair, because I mean, there's definitely lots of kind of individual characters that I'm sure can't be guaranteed that they actually existed there, or at least that they actually existed in the way that they're depicted in the film. Like there's the guy, I think he's Prussian, who they tell right kind of as the truce is about to break out, oh, go over there and scope out the machine guns. And so it gives us kind of a moment of tension. And maybe he existed, maybe he didn't. But that's kind of a character to express something that somebody might have felt. There's the
Right.
Scottish. The brothers are William and something. The two Scottish boys who sign up, and one of them dies. But he ends up shooting the Frenchman who's dressed as a German. And maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, but it kind of expresses a perspective that somebody very well could have held during the events. Yeah, it does seem like a generalized story that they've kind of filled in the dots to make it into more of kind of a character play of the events. Yeah.
Something that struck me as odd is in the opening of the film, there's a title card that's said either based on true events or based on a real story, one of those. And at the end of this, I ended up sitting through the credits, which I don't usually do because I was kind of just enjoying the music and I didn't really have anything pressing to do. So I just sat there. And then at the very end, I can't remember if it repeated the based on a true story or based on real events thing. It may have in the same frame, but I know that it said any similarities to real persons is coincidental and blah blah blah. And I don't know if that's something that the studio's lawyers just paste onto the end of every movie ever for like liability reasons, but it seemed like maybe that couldn't possibly be true if they were trying to depict the real event, even accepting some dramatization here and there.
Yeah, that is typically like a film major here. That is typically a legalese thing that you end up putting on the end of film credits, because without that, if you say based on true events and somebody goes, "Oh, well, my great grandfather told me that he used to call the cat Nestor in the trenches, and you didn't ask my permission to portray my great grandfather in this movie. I'm gonna get a lawyer." So that, though that would be a silly case, putting that kind of label at the end is kind of a bit of legalese, small print.
It's beginning to sound like a final exam hypothetical, which I do not like.
Yeah. I'm sure you've encountered similar things in some classes and questions and things like that. Yeah.
Well, Christian mentioned the music. Oh, sorry, Zach. I mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say, despite that being at the end, that doesn't make the movie into like Fargo, where the opening claim is a total falsehood or anything like that.
Yeah.
I was going to mention, Christian mentioned the music. I think I echo Christian's opinion in his review. He mentioned the opening music being kind of concerning. Was that Christian that wrote that? I think it was.
Yeah,
Probably,
the score when I think the French, I don't remember his rank, but he's giving like a speech before they go out and fight, and there's like this really dramatic orchestral score underpinning it towards the beginning.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the score in general, and also the very Christmas appropriate song choices?
Well, I tend to not notice score as much as you guys do, unless there's like a very memorable theme or a moment where the score really helps to push a beat home. I don't tend to really notice it. And I there were no glaring moments in this where I thought that is an inappropriate musical choice. But yeah, it is kind of, I think, going for Christian, you felt, I think, that the opening was maybe a bit bombastic. I kind of felt that this was a kind of a wallpaper score. It kind of harkens to the instrumentation of sort of orchestral Christmas music, which works for the setting. But there wasn't anything that stuck out to me that much. I think the most memorable musical moment in the whole thing is not from the score, it's at the end when the Germans are being taken away on the train and they're singing / humming the carol that they learned from, I think, the Scottish. And that's a memorable moment, but that's in the script as like a memorable scene. It's not kind of part of the background score.
Mm-hmm. I think that opening moment that I cited in my review concerned me because I was a little fearful that would be a constant throughout the movie, and it certainly wasn't. I think I was worried it would be kind of like a Stalingrad-ish type thing where I just couldn't quite get into it. And that opening tone made me a little nervous. But I think I also sort of incorrectly estimated the time periods that the film would focus on. I thought that most or all of the film except for some intro, would be on the day or the length of the ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a real strength of the movie that it doesn't dwell on that period of time too long, because you get a sense of the sort of temporality of it, which is what made it so kind of precious and special, is that it's this kind of ultimately fleeting thing. And during that time period, I struggle to remember noticing or hearing score during the actual ceasefire, which I think is a great choice. And of course, there's plenty of music coming from the bagpipes and the singers. But
Yes.
I think other than that opening moment, similar to Zach, I didn't take a lot of notice of the score throughout. I think it's fine. I think it's sort of the traditional use of a score to sort of underline dramatic moments, I think, is maybe more earned after the fact when they're sort of facing the consequences for the ceasefire from their higher ups. There's one musical thing that did bug me, and it was when either the first or one of the earliest instances of the bagpipes, where they join in with I think the guy starts singing and then the bagpipes join on the song.
Yeah.
They cut to the guy playing the bagpipes, and the sound is a persistent sound as though he's playing throughout.
Uh-huh.
And they cut to him twice, and both times he takes like a long breath and stops playing the pipes and then goes back. And the soundtrack is just constant bagpipe playing. So that really took me out of it, but that's, I guess, a mild complaint.
I think
Yeah.
that's how bagpipes work, though.
I don't know bagpipes top to bottom, but I think by squeezing the bag, you can keep up airflow without blowing into it.
I've learned something new today.
I could be wrong, but I believe that you blow into it, and as Zach pointed out, you fill the airbag, and then you pause blowing into it, and you can continue the tone by just squeezing the bag. That's how I think it works.
How about that?
But I could be wrong. I don't play.
No, you're adding a lot of value to this podcast already.
Yeah, I think thinking about like the Ren Fair and stuff, I think I used to get kind of confused because they weren't really look like they're playing it, but they were. But I'll have to review that scene. Yeah. I will continue this. I will sit on this fence even when my father is telling me I have to. I'm not 100% sure. But yes, I really enjoyed the all the singing parts, the way that they came together. Obviously, very dramatic, very melodramatic even, and I think, but it's very consistent with the story. It's kind of consistent of that of the Christmas idealism, I guess. There we go. Saving Private Ryan idealizes the United States, and this idealizes Christmas. I figured it out.
Okay, all right, yeah.
There you go.
I think this, and it's just applying that lens to this war situation, and I definitely think that it's not overused or anything. It's very immersive. The different languages singing together. I know how we feel about the Christmas Carol with Patrick Stewart in it, but that's one of the best scenes in that film when they're magically flying around in 90s CGI. And there's all the different cultures singing, is what it reminded me of anyway. And I think that really lends to the themes you already discussed. But yeah, in terms of the over exaggerated score in the beginning, I definitely agree with that. I think especially when they started fighting and there's already kind of like this. I think it was strings, like there was really like 10 strings or something, or brass, or I don't know. I don't remember what it was. Orchestra sounds, garage band sounds. And I think that was a little bit too much for that scene. And that's the only time it really bugged me at all. But honestly, I think I kind of agree with what Zach was saying. It's more of a wallpaper score, kind of something you would expect for this film. You like the music too, right?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was good, especially as Christian pointed out at the end. We were still humming. We were still humming it when we were after the movie. Yeah. After the movie ended, we were still walking around humming it before we got ready for the podcast. Yeah. But it was. I thought it was a good choice. It wasn't anything that stands out or looks like it was crafted specifically for this film. Could have been. But I thought it was good, though. I thought it was a good choice. But again, it doesn't stand out as something I would either openly criticize or fall back one and say, I got to get that CD.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
I'm not clamoring for the special edition vinyl
Yeah.
that released
right.
in like this year or something.
Soundtrack.
Yeah, the soundtrack.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it'll be announced next week now that we've talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
This
But
does
now that we're
happen a lot.
talking about it,
Yeah.
now it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see. We're not in control. We're not in control. Um, yeah, that's pretty much all I had discussed. Is there anything that's on the top of anybody's minds about it?
I did want to mention, Christian, you referenced the amount of story that kind of takes place after the truce, where we kind of see the consequences from on high for the actions of these soldiers, and especially the Scottish chaplain who delivers this mass to all three kind of sides of the conflict here. I think the moment where he gets that talking to from, I think, the bishop, that was maybe the moment where I most thought, is this accurate? I mean, it's a good performance from, I forget the name of the actor, but he died a few years ago. I think this was the last movie he appeared in. He was the main character on the British House of Cards, a very well-respected British actor. But he gives a good performance, but his sermon that he essentially gives to these men is essentially like, kill all of them now. None of the Germans deserve to live. And it's very forceful. And I did have to wonder, like, is this really the sermon that he delivered? I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but it was a moment where I thought maybe they're kind of amping this up a bit for the message of the film.
Yeah, I
Well,
can't
I
speak
think-
to the. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, Christian, your name is Christian, so you have to.
Oh,
go.
yes,
There it is.
Well, I did like the framework of that scene. I think mostly because I kind of thought that the priest was just going to be chastised and then walk away, and then the scene would be over.
Mhm.
But I like how one of the sort of camera moments that I do like is when it sort of has that overhead look of
Yeah.
the bishop like walking into the room to give his sermon. And of course the priest listening from the outside and sort of like hanging up his cross or his rosary. I think that's a powerful moment, and I think it's a sort of daring theme to take on when you're already juggling, like we said, the battle between realism and optimism, and I mean adding the whole like religious framework into it, and I guess the power of the church versus the spiritual intentional goodness of one person. I think that's pretty compelling, and they do it in a pretty tight window. They do it well.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, there's a lot of sermons like that. A lot of very, I think, All Quiet on the Western Front even refers to not maybe not Christian sermons, but like the political and general
Mhm.
kind of I want to say like propaganda speeches and political influence in the motivating the troops and everything. I definitely think, especially considering that this is an empire that's coming straight off, like not straight off the heels, but in the grand scheme of things, off the heels of the Holy Roman Empire and everything. And the empire definitely took some of its the German Empire anyway took a lot of those roots, kind of claiming that they were, like the official Catholics and everything, and like their Christianity is definitely the Christianity. I use Germany as an example, but England obviously had a lot of the same issues with the tight hold over the church and everything, and not having a lot of sympathy for the Pope,
Yeah.
so to speak. So I think that it definitely shows its face, and there's just this war is just absolutely chock full of a lot of very very blunt and very incendiary propaganda on all fronts, including in religion. So it's just one of those things. I mean, we always see war kind of influencing those things, but at this time it was so easy. This is a very, propaganda was so easy to pass on to the public, and it was very easy to, and a lot easier to influence people at this time in general. So
I think that sermon was an effort to undo. It was an effort for the Scottish side to undo the damage that was done in the truce. You saw what the Germans did. They took all their soldiers and they just carted them off to Russia, the Russian front.
Right. Yeah.
And then the French. What was the punishment that the French went through? The French commander was told by his father that he could be shot, but he said the only thing saving him they would have to shoot 200 men. But as Mitchell pointed out, in military etiquette, I think the French would have just shot the leaders. They would have shot the officers.
Which is what, right? Which is like paths of glory.
Paths of glory.
Right.
That.
Right.
How the French interpret the value of their soldiers at that time was pretty abysmal.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just that war was just brutal. But I think that sermon had a lot to do with just trying to undo the damage that was done, trying to get the fighting hearts after the enemy again. And I think that was, for whatever reason, might have been the part of these sermons that these churches did for this kind of thing was to rally the troops. So it may have not have been a real true Christian push, but it was something that that they did, as Mitchell pointed out, propaganda and everything like that. But yeah, overall, I would recommend the movie. I mean, I rated it 4, so I really liked it. I think it conveyed the Christmas spirit real well, and I enjoy movies like this. And it also gave a good impression of the enemy soldiers' perspective of things, their lifestyle, how they did things like that. There's a lot of war movies out there that do that. Even Sands of Iwo Jima, which was Clint Eastwood's movie, showed the Japanese perspective, how the Japanese view the Americans. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but it's sometimes those movies add perspective that you don't normally see, like the as Christian pointed out, the uber patriotic Saving Private Ryan had seemed to have one message, but sometimes seeing the perspective from the enemy side adds a whole nother facet. But overall, I would recommend seeing the movie. But I got a very strong feminine side and a big heart, so I really liked it. So
yeah, I liked it too. I think I guess for closing thoughts, I liked the sort of intro with the school children giving that sort of diatribe against the other nations. I think that's a really effective and quick way to contextualize things. Somehow I discovered after watching that Letterboxd as like a top 25 Christmas movies list, and this is on it in the sort of early teens range, which is interesting. Maybe I wouldn't have guessed that, but that list also noted that the only film with a 4-star or higher average on the list was It's a Wonderful Life. So I guess there aren't a ton of like really prestige Christmas movies out there. But the list also omits Die Hard, so that's a mistake. But anyway, we already talked about that many seasons ago. And one more thing to just let people behind the curtain. I texted the guys this, but when I sat to watch through the credits and sort of let the music wash over me, Paramount Plus started auto-playing Scrooged, which is really funny to me. And I think of all the holiday specials we've done to this point, there might not be two more contrasting picks than this and Scrooged.
And Scrooged, yeah. Both Mitchell selections too.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I really like this movie. It says what it says. It says what is it? It is what it says on the tin. That's what Zach says.
Yes.
And I definitely think it's a good, solid. If anybody's at all interested in World War I history, it's a good film. There, like my dad kind of mentioned, there was a lot of really good equipment authenticity in here. We could nerd out over that for quite a while, but there was a surprising attention of detail, considering how very kind of standard, I guess, the general Christmas message was. but nonetheless, it was very, very effective. I think, and very much is because, at least to me, a lot of how well the acting and the unique interactions there were. There really wasn't a single interaction that felt like it was replicated again, except for the literal one with him seeing his dad again. But other than that, the interactions felt very naturalistic and kind of funny too. I know we didn't really mention that, but there are some really funny moments in this that were kind of surprising. Kind of like tongue in cheek and sarcasm, and it was kind of surprising, but just lends again to the whole theme of the humanity and everything.
Maybe we'll cut this out, but I was curious about this. And you mentioned the uniform and equipment authenticity, so I figure I'll ask. At the end, when is it Daniel Bruhl? Is that the actor's name? Who's being sent away on the train, and his superior officer says, "Oh well, they'll give it to anyone these days," and he points to what I thought was a ribbon, but when I read a summary afterward, it said that that's the Iron Cross. Is that tucked inside his uniform, and that's what we're seeing is the ribbon attached to it? Or was that like an epaulet that they gave, and the Iron Cross is displayed somewhere else on his uniform? Very technical question, but I was curious about it, and I thought that you guys would probably know.
Yeah, I think the Iron Cross is with the ribbon. It's supposed to be with the ribbon.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not we saw it, I don't remember if we actually saw the cross itself.
Yeah, because he points with his cane to it, and it
Right.
looks like, I thought there was just a ribbon around like the button or something, but maybe it's tucked into his uniform. I don't know.
Yeah, my understanding was the Iron Cross was proudly displayed, and it wasn't tucked away.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
It was something that the Germans really held very high all the way through World War II.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very important. It's kind of in World War II they considered it an old army tradition. Because the when Hitler took over, the army tried to maintain its independence. It tried to maintain its culture, despite the Nazi influences. Why the SS was created, to counter it. But yeah, the Iron Cross was a big deal, and it would have been proudly displayed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I was curious about that, so I figured I'd ask.
It's interesting though. We're pointing at the uniforms. People might ask, did the French wear red pants in World War One? Not real good camouflage. And it wasn't a Christmas part of the movie. Now they actually did that. Those French uniforms were they looked fairly accurate based on what.
Okay.
So it was interesting. It was, if you look at camouflage, that the French were the last to pick that up.
Yeah. I do remember in world history in high school, which I can't remember if we were all in together, but I do remember discussing how at the beginning of World War I, maybe it was the Prussian army or the French, there was some early battle where they showed up with full cavalry with feather plumes in their hats and whatnot, and discovered that this was not that kind of war. So maybe it was the Prussian military. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I know Mitchell and I were together in world history, but I can't for the life of me remember if you were in our section.
Yeah.
No. Zach would have loved our video.
Yes, I wasn't there for Look at That Boy Go. Yes, I was not in that class.
Big man. Yeah. Yep. Well, I guess we know what's happening now, Zach. You better be not wearing a German uniform, because you're gonna get shot for running down the field.
Yeah. Running down no man's land. Yeah.
Angry Scottish man.
Yeah. Today you're not English, Zach. You're Scottish.
Yep.
Because we decided now. So this is, of course, the rundown, and as we have a guest, we're gonna rotate one by one. I think my proposed order is Mitchell's dad, myself, rinse and repeat.
Okay.
And we'll set the timer for 1 minute, and Zach will be toast.
I will.
Are we all set to go on your end?
Yes.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1, go.
Child propaganda.
2 out of 5.
Kaiser ruining theater kids.
2 out of 5.
Arresting the cat for high treason.
Oh, 2 out of 5.
Being home for Christmas.
4 out of 5.
Unstoppable like a clock.
3 out of 5.
Daniel Bruhl.
3 out of 5.
Beatles.
4 out of 5.
Nestor.
4 out of 5.
Felix.
3 out of 5.
Bro kissing
Ooh.
you just before you die.
2 out of 5.
Deserved English officer abuse.
2 out of 5.
3 languages.
4 out of 5.
Christmas tree supply.
4 out of 5.
Being voluntold.
2 out of 5.
Something called military discipline.
2 out of 5.
Everyone smoking in the trenches.
3 out of 5.
Froggy Land.
2 out of 5.
Lice.
2 out of 5.
Peace through opera and bagpipes.
4 out of 5.
Flare
2
fireworks.
seconds. Oh,
4 out of 5.
time. All right.
Okay.
Nice.
Oof. Initially, I had arresting the cat for high treason at the very end because it was at the end of Mitchell's submissions. But then I was like, we absolutely must make sure this is said.
Yeah, that is, I think, one of the most remarkable things in the movie. I had read that in reality they captured the cat and shot it. I don't know if there's actually any truth to that.
I don't know.
But
Oh,
yeah, they tried it for treason and executed it. It was something that I had heard. Maybe that's just hearsay and someone really exaggerated in a letter home. I don't know. But
That's a whole
That's
nother
crazy.
movie.
Yep.
well, I guess I can preview our next holiday special. This will be the third and final holiday special of this year's cycle. And initially, I think I had something a lot lower key planned, like a Christmas episode of The Twilight Zone or something like that. But I had planned that 8 years ago, and since then I came up with another movie that I thought would be a good choice. Cash on Demand from, I think, the early 60s. This is a Hammer movie, but it's not the kind of Hammer movie that we've seen before. It's not a horror. It does star Peter Cushing, but the best way I can describe it is kind of like a small-scale combination between A Christmas Carol and a heist movie. So I think it'll be fun. So tune in next time to see us discuss Cash on Demand.
You ever seen that?
I'm intrigued.
No, I've never seen it. Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
All right.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for
Absolutely.
being here.
Thank
and
you for being
all
here,
of
yeah.
your insights. Very valuable.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank
you,
you very
Mitchell.
much. I was really excited to have him on. There will be no other guest that's as good as my dad now. I've already set the standard too high.
The bar has been set, yeah.
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 Yep.
Get out
Yep.
of here.
All right, now get the dads on. Get the dads.
Yeah,
on.
all,
Come
all
on.
the dads.
Yep.
We'll take over the whole thing.
Yeah, only the dads. Yep. All right. This has been a truce, and it'll be the last truce that all our reviews were pretty close because we'll probably butt heads once again someday.
Someday.
All right.
All right. Tune in next time
Vine
for a
October.
dadless episode of Cookie Pocket.
That's right.